"Woe is me! I am lost." That was the cry of a man who had just seen something no human being should see and remain alive. Isaiah, the prophet who saw glory and discovered who he truly was not being attacked. He was not in physical danger. He simply saw God. And in that instant he wished he had never seen him, because when you approach absolute holiness, something terrible happens. You discover who you really are, and Isaiah discovered it. In the middle of the temple, surrounded by angels who shouted so loudly that the walls trembled, he looked inside himself, and he didn't like what he saw. But this story doesn't end in despair. It begins there. Because what happened after that cry changed not only Isaiah's life, it changed the destiny of entire nations, and it has a direct connection to something that may be happening to you right now, at this very moment. But that I'll only reveal at the end. For now, you need to understand one thing. The story of Isaiah is not about a perfect prophet. It's about an imperfect man who had the courage to say yes when God asked, "Whom will you send for us?" And when you hear what happened before that answer, you'll understand why that yes cost everything. Ready? Then take a deep breath, because we're about to enter the temple. The king was dead. Uzziah, who had ruled Judah for 52 years, was gone. And with him, all the sense of security that the people knew. The streets of Jerusalem murmured with uncertainty. Who would take the throne? What would come next? It was one of those moments in history when the ground seems to disappear beneath the feet of an entire nation. Isaiah was young, probably of royal lineage, someone who had grown up in the corridors of the palace. He knew the king. Perhaps he even admired him. And now, in that power vacuum, while Jerusalem held its breath, Isaiah did something many did in times of crisis. He went to the temple. He sought answers. He sought comfort. He sought something. But what he found was not comfort. It was something infinitely greater and infinitely more disturbing, because on that day, inside that sacred place, Isaiah didn't just find prayers echoing off the walls. He found the living presence of God. And he discovered that there are times when heaven decides to open, precisely when the earth is at its most chaotic. It's curious how it works, isn't it? When everything crumbles around us, we hope for peace, for silence, for a gentle breeze to calm us. But God often chooses these moments to reveal his glory in a way that leaves us breathless. Because God's glory doesn't calm, it transforms, it devastates, it rebuilds from scratch. And that is exactly what began to happen to Isaiah that day. In the midst of the death of an earthly king, he was about to see the eternal king. In the midst of political chaos, he was about to witness heavenly order, and nothing, absolutely nothing in his life would ever be the same again. Have you ever been in a moment like this, when everything seems to be falling apart, and you feel that something bigger is about to happen? And then it happened. The temple doors were still there, the pillars, the altar, everything physically in place. But something tore the veil between the visible and the invisible, and Isaiah saw. He saw the Lord seated on a throne, not an ordinary throne, but a high and sublime throne, so elevated that its base was lost in the clouds of glory. And there, on that throne, was he, the creator of all things, the eternal one, the Holy One. The vision was so intense that God's own robes filled the temple. Imagine the physical space overflowing with divine presence, as if heaven had invaded the earth. Around the throne, celestial beings, seraphim with 6 wings each, flew in continuous adoration. 2 pairs of wings covered their faces and feet, because not even angels could look directly at absolute holiness. And with the 3rd pair, they flew, and they cried out to one another in a melody that made the air vibrate. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Their voice was not gentle, it was powerful. So powerful that the foundations of the doors trembled. The ground beneath Isaiah's feet shook, and smoke, a dense cloud of divine presence, began to fill the place. Isaiah wasn't just watching, he was there. breathing in that air heavy with eternity, feeling the weight of that holiness pressing into every fiber of his being. His knees buckled, his heart raced. Every cell in his body screamed the same truth. He was standing before something that didn't belong to this world, something so pure, so glorious, so utterly other, that his own existence seemed insignificant in comparison. And it was at that moment, when the glory of God surrounded him on all sides, that Isaiah felt something he had never felt before with such intensity. It wasn't admiration, it wasn't peace, it was terror, holy terror, because when you see who God really is, you have no choice but to see who you really are. And that discovery, that was the part that almost destroyed him. "Woe is me!" The cry came from the depths of Isaiah's soul. It was not a whisper of reverence, it was a cry of despair. "I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips." Understand what was happening. Isaiah was not a criminal. He was not a man known for his sins. On the contrary, he was respectable, possibly noble, someone who had grown up among the privileged of Jerusalem. If there were a list of Judah's good citizens, Isaiah would be on it. But in the face of God's holiness, none of that mattered, because holiness functions like a mirror that doesn't lie. It doesn't reflect what you want to show the world. It reflects what you truly are. And Isaiah saw it. He saw his pride disguised as piety. He saw his words that seemed righteous but carried poison. He saw the lies he told himself. He saw the hypocrisy he didn't even know existed. And the more he saw the glory of God, the more he saw his own filth. It's like turning on a light in a room you thought was clean and discovering layers of dust that were invisible in the dark. The glory of God is that light, and it spares no one. Isaiah understood at that moment something that few comprehend. It is not possible to be in the presence of absolute holiness and remain comfortable with who you are. God's holiness does not praise you. It dismantles you. It exposes every crack in your soul. And that hurts. It hurts in a way that words cannot describe. But here's what makes this story so powerful. Isaiah didn't run away. He didn't try to hide. He didn't make excuses or point to the sins of others. He simply acknowledged it. "I am unclean. I belong to an unclean people, and I have seen the King, the Lord Almighty." There was total surrender in those words. There was brokenness. There was raw, naked truth. And it was precisely this devastating honesty that paved the way for what was to come. Because God isn't looking for perfect people. He's looking for people who recognize that they aren't. When was the last time you allowed God's holiness to show you who you truly are? Then one of the seraphim acted. With tongs in his hand, he flew to the altar, that place where sacrifices were offered, where the fire of God burned continually. And he took a burning coal, a live, incandescent coal, burning with the fire of God's own altar, and he flew toward Isaiah. Imagine what went through his mind at that moment. He was already in despair, already felt lost, had already confessed his impurity, and now a celestial being was coming towards him carrying fire, literal fire. Any human being would think, this is the end, this is judgment. But it wasn't. The seraphim touched Isaiah's mouth with that burning coal, and he said something that changed everything. "See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for." Pain. Probably. It burned. But it wasn't the pain of destruction. It was the pain of healing, the kind of healing that only fire can bring, the kind that destroys what needs to die so that the new can be born. The ember didn't come to punish Isaiah, it came to purify him, to remove what prevented him from being who God had called him to be. Think about this. Isaiah cried out that he had unclean lips, and God didn't argue. He didn't say, "You're exaggerating." He simply sent fire to purify exactly what Isaiah confessed, because God takes our confession seriously. He doesn't minimize our sin. He removes it completely. And here is something profound. Purification came from the altar, from the place of sacrifice. Centuries later, another fire would come, not an ember, but a cross. And on that cross, God himself would become the sacrifice that would purify not only the lips of a prophet, but the hearts of all who believed. Before we continue, let me make a quick invitation. If this story is touching your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And leave a like so that more people can find this message, because there are people who need to hear this today. Returning to the story, Isaiah was purified. But purification was not the end, it was only the beginning. Because when God cleanses someone, it's not just so that person feels better about themselves, it's so that they can be sent. And what followed was an invitation that would echo throughout eternity. From the midst of all that glory, a voice rose up. Whom shall I send? And who will go for us? It wasn't a command. It was a question. God, the Almighty, the one who could simply command, chose to ask. And there was something profoundly intimate in that question, as if he were inviting Isaiah to something greater than a mission, to a partnership, to carry his voice to the world. Isaiah, still processing everything that had just happened, replied without hesitation, "Here I am, send me." 3 words in Hebrew, Hineni Shelaheni. Here I am, send me. But those 3 words carried the weight of a lifetime, because Isaiah didn't know where he was being sent. He didn't know what he would have to say. He didn't know if he would be heard or rejected. He only knew one thing. After being touched by glory and purified by fire, saying no was simply no longer an option. And there's something crucial here that we can't miss. Isaiah didn't say yes because he felt qualified. He said yes because he had been purified. The qualification didn't come from his resume, his lineage, or his education. It came from the burning coal, from the fire of God that removed what disqualified him. God wasn't looking for the most eloquent man in Israel. He was looking for the man willing to have his lips touched by the altar, and Isaiah was that man. But here's what many don't understand. God's calling is never comfortable. Isaiah was being sent on a difficult mission. God even warned him, "Go and tell this people, be ever hearing, but never understanding, be ever seeing, but never perceiving." He would be rejected, ignored, misunderstood. And even knowing this, Isaiah went. Because when you see the throne, when you are touched by the fire, when you hear the voice of God, the only possible response is, "Send me." And God sent him. And what Isaiah did with that mission would change the course of history forever. Isaiah did not keep his message to himself. He emerged from the temple transformed, and he began to speak with a boldness that only comes from someone who has seen something most will never see. He confronted kings in their palaces. He denounced priests at their altars. He challenged entire nations with words that cut like a sharp sword. He looked King Ahaz in the eye and said, "If you do not believe, you will not remain." He confronted Hezekiah's pride when the king displayed his treasures to his enemies. He cried out against the religious hypocrisy of a people who went to the temple with their hands stained with blood and injustice. Isaiah was not afraid. How could he be? He had seen the King of Kings. What could a human king do to him? His message was harsh. "Woe to those who add house to house and field to field." He denounced greed. "Woe to those who rise early in the morning to pursue drunkenness." He exposed moral degradation. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil. He confronted the inversion of values. But Isaiah was not only a prophet of judgment, he was also a prophet of comfort. His words brought hope in the midst of darkness. "Comfort, comfort my people, says your God." He spoke of a time when the glory of God would be revealed and all flesh would see it together. He promised that those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. Isaiah lived in this role for decades. He served under the reign of 4 different kings. He witnessed wars, invasions, political crises, and moral collapses. And in every moment, he carried the voice that God had given him. It didn't matter if he was speaking to multitudes or to a single king. It didn't matter if he was popular or hated. He spoke. Because a true prophet doesn't seek to please people. He seeks to be faithful to the voice that sent him. And Isaiah was faithful to the very end. But there was something in his prophecies that transcended his own time, something that pointed to a future he himself could scarcely comprehend. Isaiah's words were weighty. He announced destruction, exile, desolation. Your cities will be burned, your land will be devoured by strangers. It wasn't easy to hear, and it certainly wasn't easy to speak, but Isaiah had seen the holiness of God, and whoever sees holiness understands that sin cannot go unpunished forever. Judah was sinking into idolatry. The people worshipped idols in high places. The rich oppressed the poor. Justice was distorted by bribery, and the religious leaders taught lies in the name of God. It was as if the entire nation had forgotten who the Lord of hosts was. Then God spoke through Isaiah. Judgment was coming, not because God was cruel, but because he was just, and justice demands that evil be confronted. But here is what makes Isaiah's message so unique. Even in the midst of prophecies of destruction, there was a thread of hope. But a remnant will return, the remnant of Jacob, to the mighty God. There was a remnant. There was always a remnant. Even when the nation went into exile, even when Jerusalem fell, even when all seemed lost, God would preserve a people for himself, because God's purpose never fails. Isaiah used a powerful image, like the terebinth and the oak, which though cut down retain their sap. So the holy seed is its sap. The tree may be felled, but the root remains alive, and from the root a new shoot will spring forth. This was not just poetry, it was a promise that God's judgment is not the end of the story. It is the preparation for a new beginning. It is the painful pruning that comes before flowering. It is the necessary cleansing so that something pure can grow. And Isaiah saw this something with a clarity that has spanned centuries. He saw a king who would come, a light that would shine in the darkness, a savior who would bring not only restoration to Israel, but redemption to all humanity. And what did he see about this savior that would change his understanding of everything? Isaiah wasn't just looking at the present. He was looking through time. And what he saw was someone who was to come, a boy. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Consider the weight of those words. A boy would be born, but this boy would not merely be human, he would be called Mighty God, Father of Eternity. How was this possible? How could someone be both man and God? Isaiah didn't have all the answers, but he saw the truth. The Messiah would come as one of us, but would be infinitely greater than us. He saw the birth of this Messiah. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel, God with us. Not a distant God, not a God merely observing, but God among us, walking our streets, breathing our air, feeling our pain. And Isaiah saw more. He saw the suffering of this Messiah. In one of the most impressive chapters in the entire Bible, Isaiah 53, he described something that seemed impossible. The servant of God would be despised, rejected, wounded, crushed. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. How could Isaiah have known this 700 years before it happened? How could he describe the crucifixion with such precision when the crucifixion didn't even exist in his time? The only explanation is that God allowed him to see through the veil of time. He allowed him to witness the greatest act of love the universe would ever know. Isaiah saw that this servant would not die for his own sins. He had none. He would die for ours. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way. and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all, and he saw victory. After his suffering he will see the light and be satisfied. Death would not be the end. There would be resurrection, there would be triumph, there would be eternal life offered to all who believe. Isaiah was seeing Jesus 700 years before Bethlehem, 700 years before Calvary, 700 years before the resurrection. He was seeing God's complete plan for the redemption of humanity, and his words would not die. They would echo through the centuries until they found their perfect fulfillment. Centuries have passed. The books of Isaiah were preserved, copied, and read in synagogues. His prophecies of judgment were fulfilled. Jerusalem fell, the people went into exile, but his prophecies of hope remained alive, pulsating in the hearts of all who awaited the Messiah. And then, one day in the Judean desert, a voice began to cry out, "Prepare the way for the Lord, make straight paths for him." It was John the Baptist, and he wasn't speaking new words. He was repeating Isaiah, word for word, a voice of one calling in the wilderness. "Prepare the way for the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God." John knew what he was doing. He was announcing that the time had come. The Messiah whom Isaiah had seen was about to appear. And John was preparing the way, calling people to repentance, baptizing them in the waters of the Jordan. And then Jesus came, and everything Isaiah had prophesied began to be fulfilled. The boy was born of a virgin in Bethlehem. He grew up and began his ministry. And when he entered the synagogue in Nazareth, he took the scroll of Isaiah, opened it, and read, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor." And then he said, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." Jesus was declaring, "I am the one Isaiah spoke of. I am Emmanuel. I am the suffering servant. I am the Prince of Peace." And when Jesus went to the cross, when he was pierced and crushed, when he took upon himself the iniquity of us all, every word of Isaiah 53 was fulfilled. It was no coincidence. It was God's plan from the beginning. And Isaiah had the privilege of seeing this plan and writing it down so that future generations could understand. Isaiah's voice has not died. It has crossed empires, survived wars, and withstood the test of time. And even today, his words point us to Jesus. But there's something deeper here, something about what it means to carry the voice of God. Isaiah learned something that few learn. The closer you are to God, the smaller you become. Not lesser in the sense of insignificant. Lesser in the sense of humble, of being aware of who you are and who he is, because the glory of God does not inflate the ego. It crushes it. And from the dust of that crushed ego, God raises something new, a true servant. Isaiah saw the throne. He saw the seraphim. He heard the cry of "Holy, holy, holy." And the first thing he did was cry out that he was lost. He didn't boast about having seen what no one else had seen. He was broken. And it was precisely this brokenness that qualified him for what would come next. Think of the false prophets of that time. They spoke in God's name without ever having seen his face. They promised peace when there was no peace. They comforted the people in their sin. And why? Because they wanted to be popular. They wanted to please. They wanted to maintain their positions of influence. Isaiah didn't have that luxury. He had seen holiness. And whoever sees holiness can no longer lie, can no longer soften the message, can no longer say what people want to hear. He had to tell the truth, even when the truth hurt. And that is the mark of a true prophet. He does not seek glory for himself. He seeks glory for God. He does not want to be admired. He wants to be obedient. He does not care if he will be remembered. He cares if he will be faithful. Isaiah prophesied for decades. He saw kings rise and fall. He saw crises come and go, but he remained steadfast. Because his mission did not depend on circumstances. It depended on the calling, and the calling was clear. "Here I am. Send me." True humility is not about diminishing yourself. It's about knowing your place. It's understanding that you were chosen not because you are better, but because you have been purified, not because you are strong, but because you are willing, not because you have all the answers, but because you know the one who does. And Isaiah lived like this until the end of his days. Tradition holds that Isaiah died a martyr. Some say he was sawn in half during the reign of the wicked King Manasseh. We don't know if that's true, but we do know that Isaiah never backed down. He spoke the truth to the end, and if it cost him his life, he paid the price without hesitation. Because Isaiah had understood something essential. True glory is not in being seen. It is in obeying. It is not in being applauded. It is in being faithful. It is not in being successful in the eyes of men. It is in fulfilling God's purpose. He could have remained silent. He could have softened the message. He could have allied himself with the kings and lived comfortably in the palace. But he did none of that, because whoever sees the throne of God can no longer be content with human thrones. Whoever hears the voice of the Eternal can no longer listen to temporal voices. Isaiah was a light in the darkness, not because he was perfect, but because he had been purified, and that purification made him a channel through which God's light could shine. He was not the light, he merely reflected it. And that is the difference between a true prophet and a false one. The true one points to God, the false one points to himself. And what about Isaiah's impact? It didn't end with his death. His words lived on. They were read for generations. They inspired kings, prophets, and apostles. Jesus quoted Isaiah. Paul quoted Isaiah. Even today, thousands of years later, his words continue to transform lives. Why? Because he didn't speak his own words. He spoke the words of God, and the words of God do not die. They transcend time. They break down barriers. They reach hearts in any era, in any place. And here's the burning question. What happens when someone says yes to God? Isaiah entered the temple as an ordinary man. He emerged as a prophet. But the transformation didn't happen because he was special. It happened because he said yes, a yes that cost everything, a yes that changed not only his life, but the course of human history. Consider what would have happened if Isaiah had fled, if he had hidden when the glory appeared, if he had refused when God asked, "Whom shall I send?" We wouldn't have Isaiah 53. We wouldn't have the prophecies about the Messiah described with such clarity. We wouldn't have that prophetic map that guided generations to Christ. But Isaiah did not flee. He faced his own impurity. He accepted the pain of purification, and he said, "Send me." And God sent him, and through him, heaven spoke to earth. And here's what I've saved for you so far, the truth that connects Isaiah's story to your own life. Because this story isn't just about an ancient prophet, it's about what happens when any one of us, encounters God's holiness. Have you ever felt that there is something greater you should be doing? Have you ever heard that inner voice asking, "Whom shall I send?" Perhaps you have felt your own impurity, your flaws, your unclean lips, and thought, "God cannot use me. I am not qualified." But look, Isaiah wasn't perfect either, until the burning coal touched his lips, until the fire of God burned away what needed to be burned away, and then he was sent, not because he was perfect, but because he was purified. The same God who called Isaiah continues to call today. He continues to ask, "Whom shall I send?" He continues to search for people willing to say, "Here I am." And when you say yes, when you allow God's holiness to reveal who you are, and God's fire to purify what needs to be purified, the story is never the same again. Isaiah changed nations with his voice, but he began with a cry of despair in the temple. He ended as a faithful martyr. But he began as an imperfect man who had the courage to stand when glory appeared. And you? What will your answer be when God asks, "Whom shall I send?" The story of Isaiah teaches us something we cannot forget. God is not looking for perfect people. He is looking for honest people, people willing to face their own impurity, people who do not run away when glory is revealed, but who humble themselves and allow themselves to be transformed. You don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to be the most eloquent. You don't need to have an impressive resume. You just need to be willing to say, "Here I am, send me." And when you say that, when you surrender to God's purification and accept His call, your life becomes an extension of God's voice on earth. Isaiah saw the throne. You may not see it with your physical eyes, but you can encounter God's presence. You can feel the weight of holiness. You can recognize your own need for purification, and you can say yes to the call. So here is my challenge for you today. Stop for a moment. In the midst of the chaos of your life, in the midst of the uncertainties, in the midst of the noise, stop and ask God, "What do you want from me?" Don't be afraid of the answer. Don't be afraid of the purification, because the fire of God does not come to destroy you. It comes to prepare you. If this message touched your heart, I want to ask you 3 things. First, leave a comment saying what God spoke to you through this story. Second, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to receive more content that will strengthen your faith. And third, share this video with someone who needs to hear that God calls the imperfect, that He uses the broken, that He transforms the willing. The story of Isaiah, the prophet who saw the glory of God and discovered who He truly was, did not end thousands of years ago. It continues to repeat itself every time someone says yes to God, every time someone allows holiness to reveal the truth, every time someone accepts purification and the calling. May you be that person. May your life be a continuation of that story. And when God asks, "Whom shall I send?" may your answer be clear and firm. "Here I am, send me." Until the next video. And remember, when God calls, the story is never the same again.